This episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast is brought to you by our friends at the Law Enforcement Today radio show.
Check out the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast, which started as a podcast in 2017. It's a syndicated radio show broadcasting to millions of people every week. Crime and or trauma stories from those that have been there. Hosted by retired police sergeant. Find the Law Enforcement Today podcast on major podcast platforms or online at letradioshow.com. That's letradioshow.com.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sheriff Scott Rose from Minnesota, and I'm your host for today's new episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast.
Walking eastbound.
In each episode of the Officer Down Memorial Podcast, we'll share the details and the stories of how these men and women heroically lost their lives in the line of duty. Our mission is to help ensure their service and sacrifice is never forgotten. Thanks for spending some time with me today to remember and honor these fallen heroes. Sedgwick County, Kansas. It's the second largest county in the state, with over 450,000 people calling it home. Its county seat is Wichita, the largest city in Kansas. The county was founded in 1867 and named after John Sedgwick, a major general in the Union Army during the American Civil War. Sedgwick County was also the setting for the murders committed by the BTK Strangler, eventually identified as Park City employee Dennis Rader. Rader was arrested in 2005, but not before killing 10 people in Wichita and Park City and sending taunting letters to police and newspapers detailing his crimes. He's currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences in the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. President Barack Obama was sworn in as our 44th President of the United States, becoming the first African American to hold the office.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
That I will execute
the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States faithfully.
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve,
protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The death of American entertainer Michael Jackson triggers an outpouring of worldwide grief on this year. Reactions to the event cripples several major websites and services as the abundance of people accessing the web addresses pushes internet traffic to unprecedented and historic levels.
We're getting some breaking news coming into the situation right now from about Michael Jackson, the king of pop, who's 50 years old. Let's go to Deborah Farrick. She's working the story for us. What are we picking up, Deb?
Well, Wolf, here's what we can tell you. This is what's being reported by KTLA. Apparently, Michael Jackson suffered cardiac arrest.
And after being struck by a flock of Canadian geese shortly after takeoff, U.S. Airways Flight 1549, piloted by Captain Chelsea B. Sully Sullenberger, makes a successful crash landing in the Hudson River.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Watkins with a PIX News special report. We are getting word of a U.S. Airways plane crash in the Hudson River. You're taking a look now at the Hudson River. To give you some perspective here, this shot is coming from the year
was 2009. Sedgwick County was one of Kansas's many dry counties until the Kansas Constitution was amended in 1986 and voters approved the sale of alcohol by the individual drink with a 30% food requirement, a requirement later removed in 1988. It's also the birthplace of famous restaurants like White Castle and Pizza Hut. The sheriff's office was located in Wichita, and Mark Pierce was a lieutenant for the sheriff's office back then.
Wichita's, and this is a rough number, approximately 350,000, so it's a mid-sized city. Sedgwick County is, again, a rough number, about 450,000 residents. Well, Wichita's claim to fame is the air capital of the world. Well, it was the home of Boeing. They've now pulled all operations, or almost all operations, out of Wichita, and Spirit builds a lot of the components for Boeing aircraft. They're still here in town. Huge employer. Beach, Cessna, Learjet, all started in Wichita. A lot of the manufacturing in town is related to aircraft manufacturing, different types of, aircraft maintenance. There's a lot of that in Wichita. There's an agricultural piece to it. All of the surrounding, outside of the city proper, there's a lot of agricultural, just farming. And then Wichita is also home to Koch Industries. Their headquarters is right here in town. All that operation is run from here. So another huge employer in Wichita.
The Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office is also a large employer in that community.
We have a rough number, about 170 sworn deputies divided between three different divisions: our patrol division, our judicial division, and our investigations division. And then another round, a rough number, about 250 detention deputies that manage our detention facility. And then 75 clerical and civilian employees that actually probably really run this agency. So the commission deputies were divided between those three different divisions: patrol, judicial, and investigations. And patrol is your normal patrol function: traffic stops, it's responding to calls for service, working traffic accidents, all of the things that, I think most people expect law enforcement officers to do. That was their role. They were a 24/7 operation. Each shift would have a lieutenant as a watch commander and two sergeants, and 16 to 18 deputies, rough number again, per shift, assigned to the shift. And then when you throw in days off and trainings and all that, you would probably, on a normal day, somewhere between 8 and 12 deputies working at any given time. And then that was the same for all three shifts. Each shift was an 8.5 hour shift.
One of those deputies working day shift was Brian Etheridge. Brian was a brand new deputy. He'd only been on the road on his own for a few months. He was 26 years young and married to his high school sweetheart, Sarah.
Brian and I met in high school, actually. We both were working at a local vet clinic in Derby, Kansas, and we both had plans to attend Kansas State University in the fall. We met late junior year and then worked all of our senior year together, and really were just nothing more but friends. We started dating right before we graduated from high school, knowing that we were both going to, attend the same university in Kansas, and we kind of had the same thought we were going to have the same career path. That kind of just, brought us together, and it was never looked back after that.
Both Sarah and Brian started college with aspirations of being veterinarians. And as often is the case with kids in careers, both changed their career majors. Sarah switched to nursing, and Brian to law enforcement.
He had been talking about it, that he thought that maybe he wanted to go into law enforcement, and Wichita has a great criminal justice program. And so he looked into that and just kind of switched gears, and we both came down here together. And so that would have been in 2003, and finished our college careers and both obtained our bachelor's from colleges here in Wichita.
In spite of the risks, Sarah supported Brian's decision to go into law enforcement.
I knew, of course, that it's a dangerous field, but I was more so just excited for him because I could tell that he was really passionate about it. I could tell that it was something that he really felt like he would enjoy doing, and he would thrive in. So I really encouraged him to continue down that path.
After college, Brian had worked a short time at the juvenile detention facility in Sedgwick County before attending a 22-week joint training academy for police officers and sheriff's deputies. He was in a class of 7 that graduated on December 12th. They would then head out to work 8 weeks of field training with the veteran deputy. It was Monday, September 28th. Deputy Joseph Green, Deputy Bennett, Deputy Smith, and Deputy Brian Etheridge were at a restaurant called Fried Rice on South Glendale near Pawnee and Oliver. This is one of those hole-in-the-wall restaurants on the south side of town that you're probably only going to find after being referred to it by another local. An Asian Chinese restaurant that had been around about 20 years. Hole-in-the-wall restaurants, they tend to be favorites for cops. They're often less busy than many of the larger chain restaurants. Often owned by local folks who, along with their staff, really appreciate law enforcement and their service. As the deputies were just finishing up lunch, dispatch requested Brian respond to a larceny report. It was 11:42 a.m.
Sedgwick County 911, what city is your emergency?
I just need to fill out a report. My car has been broken into last night. I discovered it this morning. I just need to fill out a report. They stole my wallet and some other things out of there.
What's your address?
3636 South Rock Road.
3636 South Rock Road in Wichita?
Yes.
And what's the phone number you're calling from?
683-6475.
683-6475?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a house or an apartment?
A house.
And what is your name, please?
Fletcher. Lyons.
Your first name is Fletcher?
Yes, ma'am.
Was your car parked in the drive or in the street?
Oh, it's in the driveway.
And this happened sometime last night?
Yes.
Do you have any idea who might have done this?
No, I don't.
Okay, I'll have to have a sheriff officer come out, 3636 South Rock Road. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
If anything changes, just give us a call back, okay?
You said you're going to send an officer out?
Yeah, sheriff officer.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
All right. Mm-hmm. For Larceny Report, 3636 South Rock Road. 3636 South Rock Road. Contact Fletcher Lyons, reference /need auto.
Deputy Jeff Smith had been with the sheriff's office since the fall of 2001.
I would probably say we were almost done with lunch when when Brian received the call. It was a larceny call. He answers dispatch and said that he'd be en route, and we finished up lunch real quick, and we were kind of laughing and joking as we're cleaning up, and he's going to his call. Well, Brian leaves, and the rest of us, we walk out to our vehicles, and Deputy Green gets in his car. He starts it up and gets things rolling, ready to go, and he's getting ready to leave to go to his beat. And we're talking and laughing and joking. Well, he leaves, and then me and the other Deputy Bennett, are standing there, and we're laughing. And back then, I smoked cigarettes, so we're standing there smoking a cigarette, and we're laughing. And one of the things that I remember is we're standing there in the parking lot, and this guy comes driving into the parking lot in this old CJ Jeep with no doors. It's got the bikini top on it. We look over there, and there is a coon dog sitting in the front seat on its rear end, and it's seat belted in with the shoulder harness and everything. And the dog's just looking at us. Yeah, it was the most comical thing ever. So we're sitting there and we're laughing. Just hysterically about this because it was so comical. So we're sitting there laughing, and we hear the radio key up.
Shortly after arriving on scene, Brian notified dispatch that nobody was answering at the door, and he requested the phone number to the complainant so he could call and let them know that he was on scene.
For dispatch. Go ahead.
Do you have a public service for the CP? I'm not going to answer here at the house.
Do you want me to call him, or do you want the number?
Just give me the number.
683 683-6475. 683-6475.
At noon, after Brian had been given the phone number, a garbled transmission was heard over the radio.
We hear the radio key up, and we hear muffled sound. And I associated that with, it's kind of hard to describe, but we wear, back then we wore, the only uniform we had to wear was French blue pants with kind of almost like a Smurf blue shirt, and it's polyester. So if you were in a foot chase and you were trying to key up, our old lapel mics on the old Motorola radios would scratch across that polyester, and you would get the sound of that polyester. So that's what I associated that with. And then immediately after that, dispatch keys up on the radio, and the question she asked, I believe, was for checking.
For checking.
Where's he at?
We had decided that we were going to start heading that way, just in case. Because, I associated it with a foot chase, is what I associated it with. So we get in our cars and we start heading that way. It was no time at all when dispatch alerted the officer in trouble zone. City Hall.
Officer in trouble, 3636 South Rock Road, operate sheriff. Dispatch 4 checking.
We were en route with our emergency equipment activated. We get to Pawnee and Woodlawn, and dispatch asks again for checking, and Brian comes up on the radio, and he says, 4 have been shot, hurry.
4 have been shot, hurry.
All officers have an officer down 3636 Rock Road.
And to be perfectly honest with you, at that point, I didn't think of anything else but to get to him. I still had in my mind that maybe he had stopped the car on the way to this larceny report, and that he had gotten into a foot chase. That's what I thought, because I associated that sound of the polyester with a foot pursuit. The next major intersection from Woodlawn east there is Rock Road. So now we're 2 miles into it, and then you go south, it's about another 1.5 miles south. So we were about 3.5 miles away from where he was, and that was the longest drive of my life, that 3.5 miles.
When Deputy Green arrived on scene, he saw Brian's squad car parked on the south side of the residence in the driveway, and he pulled in directly behind it. Green couldn't see Brian. He exited his squad. He drew his handgun, and then he ran to the back of the house.
We both pull into the driveway about the same time. We run around towards the back of the house, and as we step around the southeast corner of the house, we see Brian laying on the ground. He's next to a blue or greenish, I think it was a Chrysler 300. He's laying next to the driver's side front wheel. The back of the house is probably 10, maybe 15 feet away. So we run to him and start rendering aid. We're talking to him. He's able to talk to us. One of us asked him where the shooter was. He said he didn't know, but he has my gun. So one of the things that I was worried about, and Deputy Green the same way, is removing Brian from the danger zone.
By now, multiple officers from multiple agencies are responding and arriving. Mike Littleton was a detective for the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, and he was on duty that day.
We had some calls back earlier in my career, and the weirdest thing, and not a lot of people know this, because like I said, I haven't spoke about it. I was driving past that house about a week before this happened, and I was like, man, I wonder whatever happened to that guy that lived there that we used to always have problems with and always have to deal with him. And a week later, that call came out. It was right around lunchtime, and my phone was acting up, and I was at the Verizon store that was probably maybe 3 miles from that location on Rock Road. It was a straight shot to where it happened from where I was. And the Verizon store, it had a glass front. So I'm in there talking to the guy. I had left and I was on lunch, and I left my radio in the car. And that store is just right off of Rock Road. And I'm in the store talking to the guy, and next thing I know, I seen these Wichita police cars, 3 of them, buzz by, like super fast. I mean, the kind of fast it's not like, the kind of fast that got my attention to, like, nobody drives that fast during this time of day. Something's wrong. So I told the assistant, I said, hold on for a second. I ran out to my car and grabbed my radio, and I turned my radio on and went back into the store, and I didn't hear anything right away. And maybe about a minute later, I start hearing traffic on the radio.
20 traffic number 4, 10 on your traffic.
4, if you can get out, checking.
20 traffic number 4.
4, if you can get out, checking.
And I'm like, something's not right. And then I get an address.
Officer in trouble, 3636 South Rock Road, operate sheriff.
I'm like, man, I'm right here. So I bust out of the store, call my sergeant, and say, hey, man, I don't know what's going on. And he starts explaining to me what's happened. And I was heading there to where I was heading towards the scene. And he was like, I need you to stop and turn around and go to the hospital.
So there was Wichita police officers there. There was other deputies there. There was, I think, Highway Patrol was there. Of course, it's an officer in trouble call, so anybody that's close is going to respond. So the other guys are covering off the house, the windows of the residence, things like that, because we don't know where this guy is. And what we assumed, I think initially, was that he was still inside the house. So me and a WPD officer, Wichita police officer, who was on scene, moved Brian from that area over to a little in between some trees that was we had cover from our vehicles sitting in the driveway. All 3 vehicles were sitting there, so we had good cover. And by the time we got him moved, there was law enforcement everywhere. So we pretty much stayed right there with Brian. I know I did for a fact, and I know that Green did. But once we got him over there, I opened his shirt up and was trying to find assess the wounds. I was able to get his shirt off, get his vest unvelcroed, and I saw a wound in his abdomen. It was, at the time, I didn't realize that was an exit because he was shot in the back. So I could see the wound, I could see blood. One of the things I reverted back to was it wasn't too long prior to that when we were introduced to Quick Clot. We were trained on Quick Clot, and we had received Quick Clot, and each vehicle was equipped with Quick Clot. So immediately, that's what I thought of. So I run back to my car and grab my first aid kit that has the Quick Clot in it, get back over there, and I pull this Quick Clot out, rip the package open, and as I open it, it's a sponge, and I don't know what to do with it. I'm reverting back to the training. I was never in the military, so my introduction to Quick Clot was what I received from the sheriff's office. So in the training videos we were showed, it was in powder form. So you just tore the top, dumped the powder into the open wound. So I mean, in a panic, I pull this off. I don't know what this is. I'm able to get my knife out and I cut this sponge open, and I start dumping these pellets they were pellets. You know, I start dumping them into the wound and I'm compressing them, and you know, I'm trying to reassure Brian it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You know, and I mean, the first initial contact with that quick Clot, I mean, he lets out a scream that, you know, I mean, it's just that's a scream that, you know, almost 13 years later, I still hear. So, I mean, we do everything we can. I mean, there's some kind of delay with the ambulance. We're not sure what's going on, but we're getting pretty upset because we need to get him to the hospital. You know, that's all we know. We need to get him medical treatment now. We were doing everything that we could possibly do for him right there. And I mean, I'm not medically trained. I don't know. You know, back then they didn't teach combat medical and things like that. But it's incidents like this that ramped up that training. I found out later that the ambulance was delayed because the scene wasn't secure, so they couldn't make it into the scene. It was quite frustrating. So we finally get Brian in the ambulance. We carry him to the ambulance. They get him up in there, and I mean, we remain on scene. At that point, you know, we were assigned to take up a post on the perimeter. Majority of us were assigned M4 rifles, and that's what we had. You know, M4 rifles up on post on the perimeter, because at that time everybody believed that the suspect was inside the residence. We weren't on the perimeter for probably 10 minutes until they pulled myself and Deputy Green off the perimeter and took us upstairs to our investigations for debriefing.
The EMS report indicated it took officers only 4 minutes from the time they arrived to get Brian to the ambulance, and they transported him to Wesley Medical Center. When notifying a spouse that their husband or wife has been shot and injured, like Brian had been, most agencies will work to make sure that notification is done by someone in administration, someone who's accompanied by a chaplain and maybe another fellow officer. With everything happening so fast and unexpectedly during this incident, that just wasn't the case with Sarah's notification.
Sarah is notified when one of her close friends calls her because this friend's husband had heard that an officer had been shot on the media. Sarah at the time was working was a third shift nurse working in labor and delivery at Wesley Hospital here in Wichita. So she was home in bed. Brian was working. She was home in bed.
We had a home phone and we used it, you know, and I think it was my home phone that rang first and woke me up, and I sat up in bed, answered the phone, and I remember even thinking then, like, everyone knows I'm sleeping. Who's calling me in the middle of the day, you know? It was a friend from work, a coworker at Wesley Medical Center, another nurse, and she had received a phone call from her husband. She had also been sleeping, and was given the information that a Sedgwick County Sheriff's deputy was shot on Rock Road. Well, she knew that Brian and I talked every morning, because by the time that I was leaving work and driving home, he was already out of squad. He'd already, you know, been assigned his beat, knew where he was going to be. And so that was usually, you know, we'd always touch base then. And he kind of let me know, because he wasn't assigned a specific beat at the time. And so she knew that I always knew where he was. And she told me, she said, you know, never in a million years would I have thought that I would have been the first person that voiced this to you, that let you know that the event had even happened. She said, I fully expected to call you, have you answer the phone and say, it wasn't him, and give her the story, basically. And so when she realized that I hadn't talked to him and I didn't know anything about it, she changed her verbiage a little bit. She said that she had heard that a cop in Wichita had been shot. I think she didn't want to alarm me too much, you know, with specifics, I guess. I was worried right off the bat, of course. Brian and I had always, well, I mean, as much as we could have a plan, like you said, we were so new. We hadn't really developed any kind of routine. But he had always told me that, you know, if anything happens, and I can call you, because we didn't even have text messaging plans on our phone back then. And so he said, if something ever happens, if I can call you, I'll do my best to call you, even if it's just to say I'm okay and hang up the phone. The fact that I hadn't gotten a call from him, I was a little worried. I tried to call him right away, and of course got no answer, which made me a little bit even more concerned. But my initial thought was, well, maybe he's there. Maybe he's helping. Maybe he's in the middle of, Wichita's pretty, even between the Wichita Police Department and Sedgwick County Sheriff's Department, they work so well together that I knew that if anything had happened during the day, any type of law enforcement would have responded and helped with the situation. So I was hopeful that that's why I couldn't get a hold of him. Shortly after I got off the phone with my friend, I had a phone call on my cell phone, and that was from a Wichita police officer that had been in the academy in Brian's class, but graduated on the PD side of things. And I guess we didn't know that at the time, but we were very fortunate. They were a very close-knit class. That was back when they still did all of their training at the same place between the sheriff's department and the police department. And we all really just hit it off from the beginning and would go out to dinner together, go out and get drinks, go boating. I mean, we did all kinds of stuff on our date. And also, you have to learn to adapt to other people that have Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, because that's not normal. So we were good friends, and I was good friends with this female officer, but she wasn't somebody that ever picked up the phone and called me, especially during the day. So that right there made me even a little bit more alarmed when I realized it was her. And again, very similar situation. She told me that she had been woken up. She was a night shifter, had been woken up by a dispatcher who had let her know that it was Brian that had been shot and that he was being taken to Wesley. And she said, had I been awake enough to stop and think about it, I would have paused, but she goes, I just called you because I expected you to tell me I'm with him, this is what's happening, and be able to give her the story. When she realized that I didn't know, she changed her conversation really quickly too. I remember she asked me, like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm at home. And I said, what's going on? Like, is there something going on? And she goes, why do you ask? And I said, well, I just had a call from a friend, and she told me that a cop in Wichita has been shot, and I can't get a hold of Brian. And it was this part of the conversation with her where I knew that things were not good. And she just told me, she said, Sarah, I need you to stay at home. I'm coming to your house right now, and I need you to call the sheriff's department. She didn't want to be the one to say it was him. So I told her, okay. I got off the phone. I remember getting out of bed at that point, walking into our kitchen and letting our dogs out in the backyard. And I stood there in the kitchen for a little bit, and I looked at the fridge, and I guess that, takes me back to a time when I was young, and that's where you find the emergency phone numbers. And as I was sitting in the kitchen, I realized I have no idea who to call. I didn't have his supervisor's phone number. I didn't have a phone number for any deputy that he worked with. Since he went to day shift, he wasn't friends with any of those people, prior to. And I knew a lot of people out of his class, but all of those people worked second and third shift. And I realized too that I didn't have a number for the squad room. Not that would have mattered because there wasn't anybody there at that point, but I didn't have any contact information. So I called my friend back, the female police officer, and I said, I don't know who to call. I don't have any phone numbers. Please tell me, do you know, was it him? And she said, yes, it was Brian. She said he was shot in the chest. There's an exit wound in the back. He's being taken to Wesley. And which was a little bit of inaccurate information, but that's what she had been told. And I remember thinking at that point, I just sat down on the floor in the kitchen, and I remember thinking that he was already gone. I thought for sure that I think I asked her, is he alive? She didn't know. And I thought, they know that he's gone, they just don't want to tell me over the phone. Because I do remember her continuing to say, there's police officers on the way to your house. Just stay there. Just stay there.
Another department of the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office that was deployed to this incident was their forensics investigations team. Today, it was forensics investigators Mandy Bruno and Tiffany Moreland. Mandy was the senior investigator. She had been with the sheriff's office for 13 years, initially a deputy on the road prior to moving into forensics. The two of them were back working in their office when they were advised of the shooting.
They came back and said, hey, there's 2 deputies that got shot. And I'm like, okay. And I'm a work mode person. So as soon as I hear whatever call it is, I go straight into work mode. I'm non-emotional. I have nothing. The carrot, my cousin always calls it like the carrot in front of the rabbit, and I'm straight for it. And so I told Tiffany, I said, hey, come on, you're going to hop in with me. We'll go together, grab your camera. And I had her grab, like a scale or something. And so our vehicles are loaded down with the supplies that we need to do just about any scene. So we get out and we start driving. And as we're driving, I realized we don't know which hospital he's going to. Because we have 3 hospitals in Wichita. And so we're literally, amped up. I'm amped up on adrenaline and trying to figure out where I need to go. And so we're driving around waiting for them to tell us where he's going to go. And at this point, we think there's 2 people shot. So they end up telling us Wesley. So we go to Wesley, and I'm doing what I normally do with people that are newer. I'm going kind of going through the checklist. I'm like, okay, you take the guy on the right, I'll take the guy on the left. Take pictures. I want you to do this. This is what the ER is going to look like. And I'm telling her, get your camera, have your scale. You need a bag. We need bags. And I'm going through all the things that you need to get, like a bag for shoes, a bag for socks, a bag for pants, a bag for, shirt, vest, underwear, radio. Need a box with a gun. If they, I'm not knowing what is going to be there. I'm just going through everything that needs to, equipment-wise, we need to have, because you don't want to get stuck in the hospital and need something that you have to go get. So we're running through everything, and we get there, and we go in. We're in there and realize, wait a second, there's only one guy. So I had told her to go down his left side, and I went down his right side. And so it's very chaotic in the ER when that situation is occurring. And so you need to get what you can get, because you don't know where the victim, the patient's going to go. And so I'm trying to take the pictures that I can take while not getting in the way of the doctors or the nurses. And so we're taking these pictures of him, and he was in a lot of pain. And he was making noises because he was in pain.
Jonathan Murray lived just up the street from where Richard lived with his grandparents, Fletcher and Lee Lyon, at the house at 3636 South Rock Road. Jonathan was Richard's cousin. He said he heard 2 gunshots, but thought it was probably just Richard hunting, which he would do from time to time, hunting rabbits or squirrels or sometimes deer. Murray also told detectives that Richard had told him for the past 4 months or so, Richard had been having dreams that were coming true. Richard told him that about 2 weeks earlier, he had a dream that he got into a shootout with police and killed 2 officers before they killed him. Murray said Richard told him he believed this dream was going to come true, so he told Murray that if anything were to happen, to make sure he got away from Richard so he wouldn't get hurt. Unfortunately, this was only reported to law enforcement after Brian was shot. Lieutenant Pierce was on the SWAT team that day.
So myself and the other lieutenant, like I said, we were both on the SWAT team. We immediately started gearing up. We'd already called for a SWAT activation, and one of our newest members from the SWAT team had also arrived about the same time. So I just started. He's like, hey, what do I need to do? And I'm like, first thing, get these fire truck and firemen away from the scene, get them back out of this danger area. And then we just started sitting at the perimeter, trying to gather as much intelligence as we could, what was going on. We had several uniform officers from multiple agencies that were around this house already. And I was specifically communicating with one of our deputies who was on the back side of the residence and said that there had been a window blind in an upper window that he had saw, and it was the old style roll-up blinds, just the vinyl roll-up. And he said, I saw that blind go up somebody's in that room, somebody's in that upper level. So we pretty quickly started setting up a perimeter with the SWAT team as they arrived around that particular house. Initial intel was that the folks that lived there was an elderly couple, and their car was there at the scene. And we were told by family, if that car is there, they are in the house. They never leave that car. So now we have a concern that we have a potential hostage situation inside the house. And we knew pretty quickly when this all started breaking loose that the caller that placed the initial phone call lied about who he was. He gave the name and identified himself as his grandfather. One of our deputies, he had been at that residence in the past, and he ended up in a pretty good fight with a younger guy that lived in that house, and he pretty quickly identified, hey, if that's happening at that house, and he identified who our prime suspect was. Turns out he was correct, but at this point, we still believe now that our suspect may be in the house with his grandparents, and he's either harmed them or he has them hostage. So at that point, we're just trying to kind of slow things down a little bit to get a perimeter set, get all the resources in there. We've got the entire mile section now. So it's Rock Road on the west side, it's Webb Road on the east side. On the north side, it's 31st Street South, and on the south side, it's 39th Street South. So we've got a full mile section that we've now surrounded. And the majority of that is farmland, but on each one of those roads I mentioned, there's a house or two, small little neighborhoods, and I'm going to estimate we ended up with in excess of 300 officers from multiple agencies that were on that perimeter surrounding this entire mile section. ATF, Kansas Highway Patrol, Mulvane PD, Derby PD, Wichita PD, Bel Air PD, all of our small town agencies, all of the Kansas Bureau investigation, Kansas troopers were there. I mean, we had some representatives from the McConnell Air Force Base that came over to offer assistance, whatever we might need. So it was a huge effort. We had members from the KBI SWAT team then that joined us, the KHP's SRT team, they joined us, some of the group from the Derby Police Department SWAT team. So it was truly a huge effort. But initially it was set up a perimeter, get the officers that were on the perimeter initially, get them moved back to a safer location, and then SWAT began taking over that perimeter.
The Wichita Police Department Air Unit also responded and assisted with the perimeter from the air. Unfortunately, due to the thickness of some of the vegetation in the fields, as well as several thick tree rows, the view from both the air and ground were obstructed in many areas inside this perimeter. The rifle that Richard had used to shoot Deputy Etheridge was found at the scene. It had apparently malfunctioned as the two of them struggled. But officers believed that Richard was still armed with at least Brian's 9mm duty weapon. A duffel bag was also found in a location in the backyard of the residence. It appeared to be the spot where Richard had been waiting for Brian and other officers. The bag contained a Bible, some clothing, a large knife, and additional rounds for the rifle. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, tear gas was deployed into the house. It was an attempt to get Richard to come out and surrender. SWAT also tried unsuccessfully to get their robot into the house.
One of the things that occurred on this, because of the number of law enforcement officers on scene, we ended up splitting the operation onto 2 radio channels. And those that were part of the outer perimeter and were on one channel. And those that were on the inner perimeter, primarily the SWAT units that were in the inner perimeter, were on a second channel. And there wasn't, it doesn't seem like we had great communication back and forth from our command post between what the 2 different units or elements were doing. But we didn't realize really anything was going on the inner perimeter. We were still concentrating on the residents. We were actually starting to get prepared we'd done things all day. There'd been, multiple attempts to make contact through the phone. There'd been multiple attempts through PA systems, and with no luck, there'd been no information. At some point during the day, we learned that the grandparents weren't in the residence. They had actually been picked up by another relative for doctor's appointments. So that quickly kind of changed our focus a little bit. Now we're pretty convinced that if he was in the residence, it wasn't a hostage situation any longer. That there had been attempts that at that time the Wichita bomb unit had a robot that had camera. We tried to get that in the door, and it was just a mess. I mean, we spent an hour trying to get this thing in the door to get an idea what was going on inside the residence, and we went through a process where they could take the wheels off, and it was just, it just didn't work. It really, I understand the reasons behind it. It all makes sense. In the end, it ended up being a very frustrating process to try and get this darn thing up this ramp, and the back door of the residence, and it was actually the primary way the family went in and out of the residence. There was a wheelchair ramp that they used, and they didn't use the front door. It didn't look like really anything. And the back door, the main door was standing open, and the screen door was propped open with a paint can, which again kind of led us to believe that maybe he is in the house. Maybe this is another attempt for him to lure us into the house, things like that. So even that, the robot is just trying to get in, knock the paint can free, and then the door slammed shut, and the robot couldn't get the door back. It was a frustrating for those of us that were there. But so we didn't realize anything was happening at that point until we started hearing gunshots out in this field a little bit to the north and east of us. And one of us switched over to this radio channel, and we learned then that the McConnell Air Force Base had given us a couple of armored Humvees that we were using to drive out in this field, looking to make sure he wasn't out there in the field.
The three officers in the bed of this Humvee included 32-year-old Special Agent Michael Jones from the ATF. Michael had actually just hit his 10-year anniversary the day before this incident, and he was working in their Wichita office that day when they heard there was an officer-involved shooting.
Officer-involved shooting, suspect in the wind. They kind of told us where it was, and that all available law enforcement was basically setting up a perimeter on these mile roads. It was kind of southeast of the city. At the time, we weren't assigned patrol rifles, but we had 3 or 4 of them available for the office. So we grabbed a couple rifles, and we all started headed that way in our cars, and got on the radio, kind of waiting for instructions from our boss, who basically said, "Go find a spot on the perimeter and post up there." So me and Doug Monty, who was a senior agent in the office, he and Steve Grabat, who he was a local cop and then an ICE agent, and then came over to us a couple years after I hired on. The 3 of us found a spot on a road and stood there behind our cars looking at an empty field for a long time. Mike Butler, who is a Kansas Highway Patrol, he was there also with his brand new patrol rifle that had just gotten issued to him. So we just kind of naturally started talking to Butler and kind of hung out for the afternoon. At some point during the day, they set up a command post at an intersection where the west side of the intersection was the entrance to the McConnell Air Force Base. So at 2 or 3 in the afternoon or something, some dude from the Air Force Base, walked out to the command post and said, "Hey, we can't drive these for you, but here's all these Humvees if you want them," and just gave a bunch of keys to Humvees to the command post. So Wichita had, they call them SCAT units, they were basically uniform drug units, one for each precinct in the city, and there's northeast, south, and west. So they put the SCAT units in these desert camouflage armored Humvees and started sending them out into this mile square fielded area looking for this guy. Later in the afternoon, criminals in Wichita figured out that there weren't any cops on the street, and dispatch was getting their asses handed to them with calls. One of the police department captains who got put in charge of the perimeter coming around and sending the PD uniform people back to the street to handle calls. And as he's coming by, he sees us with our rifles and says, "You guys have the tools. Once you get to the command post, and we'll get you into one of these Humvees and get you, in the fight." So me and Steve and Doug and Mike Butler go to the command post. And just me and Steve had rifles. Doug didn't have one, but Mike Butler did. So we go to the command post, and it said, they found us a Humvee that was it looked like a leftover OD green with a soft top on it, and it was an empty pickup truck bed. I'm here's the last one we have, and really? All right. So Doug, the senior guy in our office, he was just kind of the rock we put our back to when stuff was going sideways. He's just like one of those guys who just knows. He knows the way the ATF wants the job done, and also knows the right way to do the job, and knows how to walk that line. So we made him drive. He got like a crash course on how to use the Humvee. So, and then we piled up. We all piled into like the cab, and the three of us couldn't really see out of it very well. So we're like, screw this. So we got up into the bed up in the back of the Humvee, and like rolled the back window of the soft top down so we could communicate with Doug. And we're kind of on the north side of the perimeter, waiting for. They said, "Give us a minute." So during all this, the AD and county SWAT team was attacking the bad guy's residence, and they were supposed to be doing like an explosive breach right at 5 o'clock. So we're kind of sitting there. We hear, I remember hearing taps play over the base housing PA system, and we were seeing like some other Humvees like riding around. I'm like, what are we waiting for? Let's just get going. So we drove south into this field, kind of followed a dry creek bed, like to a tree row. So we were passing under like these really like broad but low hanging tree branches to the point where we had to like duck down, like the branches were like rubbing across the roof of the Humvee. And as we were going into this tree, saw the suspect's legs, like his blue jeans, on the south side of this tree, and kind of like smacked the top of the Humvee to get Doug's attention. And it's like as soon as Doug stopped, we all heard a gunshot. Memory is weird. Like I don't know how other people have like experienced this stuff, but like for me, like I don't have like my brain obviously isn't processing in HD. I have like snapshots. So I remember seeing Steve proned out the back of the Humvee with his rifle pointed towards the passenger side of the Humvee, which is where I was seated. Heard a gunshot. And I think all of us assumed that it was one of us that fired at him. And then we heard, he's running. So he took off southbound, and we're on the north side of the tree row. So we all bailed out of the Humvee and went running off after him. It was like prairie grass. It was probably up to the middle of our chest. We chased him probably 7,500 yards before he like sort of turned as he was running and fired at us. So that's one of the like snapshots that's like still very clear to me. Initially, I think I was around 50 or 60 yards from him. Mike Butler was to my right a little ways. He was a little bit further back, and then Steve was even further to the right of Butler, and I think he was close to 70 something yards. Yeah, but I'm still 50 yards from him. So he fires at us, we stop running and engage him, and he goes down in the grass, and we can't see him because the prairie grass is, chest high. So we kind of start trying to communicate with each other. Doug is coming up behind us also, but doesn't have a rifle, so he doesn't engage with his pistol. So we advance up towards where we last saw him a little bit, and then he pops up again, and we're around 40 yards from him, fires at us a third time, and we return fire again, and he goes down. And I think we all kind of knew he was down for good, because we advanced up on him a little more briskly, and like right as we were coming up on him, one of the SCAT teams in the armored Humvees came up on us. Like I remember as I'm seeing the suspect down in the grass, I've become aware of the presence of all these other cops around me. I think the guy just to my left is a cop that I knew and had worked with a little bit. I remember being like, where the hell were you guys? Or where did you guys come from? And why didn't you get here sooner? So we maintained a tactical L on him for what seemed like forever. And then I think another tactical team came up on us, and somebody gave the instruction that they were going to go hands-on and secure him. And once he was in handcuffs, then we could sort of back down. And yeah. We hit him, I think 7 or 8 times. A lot of them, we were firing 223 or 5.56 rounds. We hit him 7 or 8 times, most of them through and through, but they did pull 3 slugs out of the suspect's chest cavity, and they matched 2 of them to Steve's rifle, and one of them to mine.
As with many of the others who have helped tell this story, you can really hear the emotion in his voice as he describes the incident. Over a decade later, after being forced to shoot someone to take a life, even though he did it to save his own, even though it was the man that ambushed and shot Brian, this incident still makes him emotional. TV dramas like CSI and like Law & Order, they show officers getting into shootings and continuing with their day and chasing down the next bad guy. Well, that's just not real life. Regardless of what the mainstream media would like you to believe, or what some politicians would like you to believe, cops, they're just human. Cops are just like you and me. And when you're involved in a traumatic incident like this, it has a lasting effect on you.
So, there are several ways it affected me. The first, most easiest to describe is there was a significant uptick in my alcohol consumption. I think a big way that it affected me, I'd always taken, firearms and tactical training seriously. Before this, always sort of curious, like what if I got into this, situation, what it would be like and how I would react. Going back to how this has affected me. I mean, obviously you can tell there's still emotion there. I'm an introvert. Probably haven't dealt with that emotion as best as I should, because that's what we do. Put it in a jar, stick a lid on it, push it down. So yeah, I can tell obviously it still affects me emotionally, and a lot of that is, I don't know, it's hard to say whether it's the actual experience itself or just the emotion involved in the aftermath of it, because it was, the result of a fallen officer.
Throughout the day, all indications from officers on scene and from the medical staff that was treating Brian was that Brian would need surgery but would likely survive his shooting.
That was the initial reports that we were getting. The deputies that were at the scene, they all said he was able to talk to them. He was able to give them information on the suspect. He was talking all the way to those in the ambulance with him. One of the WPD officers first arrived on the scene was a former Army combat medic, and Brian had been shot twice. The first was with the 30-30 rifle, and that was in the back. And then after Brian was shot, the suspect moved up on him, and they fought over Brian's handgun, and ultimately Brian lost that fight, and he shot Brian through the bottom of his foot. We believe as Brian is trying to kick at him. And so the PD officer that was there in the ambulance, he was working on Brian's wound to his foot, while EMS is working on the more critical wound that was on Brian's back. So as Brian was going into surgery, he was adamant with the anesthesiologist that you have to call my wife. And Brian was not cooperating with the anesthesiologist that was trying to put him to sleep. So finally this anesthesiologist wrote Sarah's phone number down in the scrubs and said, "Look, I've got it right here. The second you're asleep, I'll call her." It was around 12:30-ish, somewhere in that area, when Brian arrived at Wesley Hospital.
When the female police officer came, I remember she said, she told me who she was, and she said, I can take you to the hospital, but I can't turn on my lights and sirens. Do you want to go with me, or do you want to wait here? There's sheriff's deputies coming. And at that point, I was not staying at home any longer. I'm like, just let's go. And so we got in the car, and as we were pulling out of the neighborhood, we saw a sheriff's car, and she pulled over, and it was this sergeant that was trying to find our address.
What we learned later in all of this is that when Brian's home information was entered into our database, Brian lived on a street that was Custer. But in Wichita, there's a Custer Street, a Custer Avenue, a Custer Court, a Custer Circle, all of those things, right? So all we had was Custer. So we're trying to run down all of these different, and those Custers would have the same, so you could have a 5500 Custer Street, a 5500 Custer Avenue, 5500 Custer Circle. So he's running through all those trying to get to the right one. So that caused another delay. But ultimately, he does get her to the hospital. Again, sadly, just after Brian was wheeled through on his way to the emergency room. And at that point, he was still awake, conscious, and was able to talk. So Sarah had missed him by just a few minutes of getting there to see him.
I got in the car with him. I'd never met him before, but this is one of the, first feelings of comfort, if you even want to call it that I felt, because I remember looking over and seeing his name tag, and I at least recognized his name. I'd heard Brian talk about him, and that made me feel a little bit better. I thought, okay, now we can, finally, I'm gonna get some information. And I asked him. I remember that on the way there, just the tense ride of driving so fast, and I'm sure being a law enforcement officer, nobody moves out of the way, and it's difficult, yeah. And at that point, I really had time to kind of stop and think. And I remember I asked the sergeant. I said, "Okay, what happened? Like, was this a car stop? What I think that was the first thought that I had in my mind. Like, how did this go down? What exactly went on?" He didn't have any information about what was going on at the time, and he's like, "Sarah, I just came from home. I don't know." When we got to the hospital, we just pulled up in the ER part, in the ER entrance, and I think I'd left my purse in the door wide open and just walked right in, and I saw two officers. One was a deputy, the one that had graduated in the top of Brian's class, so he was definitely a familiar face, and his girlfriend, who was a Wichita police officer, all out of the same class, all out of Brian's class. And when I saw Justin, he was in plain clothes, but he had a radio. And I remember just feeling really comforted by that fact, that I saw a familiar face and that he had a radio. Maybe he would, be able to tell me what the heck happened, what was going on. And I do remember he said, as I walked in, he's like, "Oh, Sarah, you just missed him. They just took him to surgery." So, perhaps had I driven myself there, or had things, gone a little differently with being able to locate me easier, maybe I would have been able to see him. He was awake, he was alert, he was conscious. I struggled with that for a really long time. I still do on some level, but I have to tell myself that just wasn't in the plan that day. For whatever reason, the last time that we talked on the phone, and it was a normal conversation, and he told me, "I love you," and we said goodbye like we always did, and that was the last conversation we had, and that's how it was meant to be, obviously.
Sarah didn't know it at the time, but one person did get a chance to talk to Brian before he went into surgery.
There's other officers that are in there in the ER, and some of them they had some of his stuff. They had his I can't even remember, like a radio, and I'm not sure what else, that were on a different table over there. So went over there, and I'm taking pictures of that too. And I'm standing there, and I'm looking at him, and he looks over at me, and his right hand, index finger and his middle finger, he beckons. He kind of moves his fingers like, "Come here," and kind of beckons me to him. And I came over there, and I held his hand, and I told him, I said, "I am so proud of you. You did everything that you were supposed to do. You did a good job." And pretty soon after they shot him up with something, he went out. And they wheeled him out, and they told us that he was going to be okay. As he goes up to wherever they're going to do surgery, I follow him up there. I believe Tiffany went with me. I honestly don't remember. And I don't remember what floor it was on. I remember none of that. But I saw his wife, Sarah, who I had never met before, or at least not to my recollection. And I told her, "Hey, he's going to be okay. I think he's going to be okay." And I really... I struggled with that for years and years, because they, you're told not to do that. And I wasn't, I don't know. They told me he was going to be okay. And I felt awful. I mean, for years, I struggled with that. And I was just like, I lied to her. And, I mean, obviously not intentionally, but I didn't know.
Detective Littleton had also been there with Mandy and Brian. When Brian was wheeled up to surgery, Detective Littleton headed back to his office to keep working on paperwork for this case.
When I went back to the office, I had my radio on, and I'm sitting there doing paperwork, and I'm listening to the radio. At this time, like, the SWAT's out there. They got some bees out in the field, and like I said, it's like 2 miles from my house, too. They had literally that whole mile section booked. And I'm listening, and I hear one of the KBI guys say, we see him. And then I hear one guy say, I see him in the field, and he's running, and he's, shots fired. He's shooting at us, shots fired. And suspect down, and I run and out of the courthouse, get back into my car, and I head back to the hospital. So they bring him into the same room that Brian was in it was the same room, but Brian wasn't there. So they're working on him, and I'm standing there watching. Then they pronounce him. I go back to the office, and I'm doing paperwork, and then I get a notification that Brian had passed away, and I just literally broke down at my desk because I'm like, what? The dude said he was, out of the woods. I mean, not out of the woods, but stable, and man, that just devastated me.
After they took Brian to surgery, all Sarah could do was wait.
Everybody that had been in the trauma bay with him was very optimistic. Everybody was like, Sarah, he's talking, he's with it, he's giving us information, he's giving us good information, he's worried about you. He kept saying, somebody call my wife, because he was probably thinking she's going to kill me. And it does make me feel really good to know that, he was worried about me and Natalie. But so, at that point in time, he's in surgery, and they take myself and these other deputies and, close friends and family that had made it there up to like a surgery waiting room. And we waited for several hours. Even throughout the entire, first couple of hours of surgery, I think things looked very optimistic. And at that point in time, I started to, gain more information about what had happened, that he had been shot in the back, with a rifle, and that he had also had his duty weapon taken from him and had been shot in the foot with his duty weapon, and that the suspect was still at large and had Brian's gun. They didn't know where he was. That was concerning off and on, but I specifically remember being in the bathroom with one of my friends, and I kept saying, like, he's going to be fine, right? And she was like, yes, he's going to be fine. He was talking when he got here. He was, everything's going to be okay. And I remember we kind of joked about having to probably get him a bell when he, came home for recovery so he could summon me from the couch. And, but we really thought that things were looking well, and that, things were going to go well. And it was probably close to, between 3 and 4 o'clock, maybe, well, probably closer to 3, that the trauma surgeon came in, and we had already gotten an update from like an assisting resident earlier, but the head trauma surgeon came in, and I knew enough to know that, like, this is the guy that's operating on him right now, so he's stopped doing what he's doing to come in and talk to me, and he just basically just shot it straight, which it was really hard to hear, but I'm really thankful for the information that he gave, and he definitely prepared us in a way that we weren't expecting at all prior to that. I remember he came in, and he knew that I was a nurse. He knew I worked at Wesley, and he definitely used terms, I think, that he was trying to let me know how serious things were. He said, Sarah, things don't look good. He said he's lost a lot of blood. We can't keep his blood pressure up. We can't keep his temperature up. We can't stop the bleeding. And there's a really good chance that he's going to die. And he goes, you need to pray. And things definitely just completely took a turn from that moment on. He said, I'm going to move you out into the surgery hallway, basically, that was on the way to ICU. And he said, if I can get him stable enough, I'm going to move him to SICU. I'm not even going to be able to stop the bed. Like, you're not going to be able to see him, but I'm going to let you wait in the hallway with just, like your closest family, just pick a couple people. And that way, if we can get him moved, you'll at least be able to see him go by. So we went to the hallway, and I remember it being myself, my mom and dad, Brian's mom and dad, his sister, and our priest, and a couple other deputies that were really close friends of his. And we were waiting there when I'm not exactly sure what time he came out. They worked on him for quite a while, even after they pronounced it. But he came out, sometime after 4:30, and just told us that he didn't make it.
At 4:20 p.m. on Monday, September 28th, Brian was pronounced dead at the Wesley Medical Center Emergency Department, about 4 hours after he was shot. Brian's killer died 2 hours later. Sarah and Natalie would stay at Sarah's parents' place that night, and she now had to tell Natalie, Brian's 2-year-old daughter, that he was gone.
After my mom had, been on the phone with me, she had a good friend come and pick Natalie up and took her back to her house. She had little girls too. And I remember they were going to bring her back home. And I told her that night. I remember she came walking in, and she looked like a bag lady. She had like a princess crown on, and like all this jewelry on her arms, and she was wearing somebody else's pajamas, and her hair was still wet from her bath. And I remember vaguely telling her that Brian had died, and she's a very, very smart girl, very verbal. She was talking in full conversations at that point. She knew, but I think she was still just so, caught off guard by the fact that, oh, we're spending the night at Grandma and Grandpa's, and Mom's spending the night here too, and this is great, and I remember telling her, but I don't remember much after that or that night, other than I just didn't sleep.
Both Detective Littleton and forensics investigator Mandy Bruno attended Brian's autopsy. Certainly not because they wanted to. It was because it was their job. It was their job to be there. It was their job to document everything for their case, for Brian. The autopsy revealed that Brian was killed by a bullet fired by a .30-30 rifle. This was the bullet that was recovered from the inside of the front panel of Brian's ballistics vest. The bullet had penetrated the back panel of his vest. It had traveled through his abdominal area and had caused massive internal injury and exited out his lower left chest area. Brian also had a gunshot wound to his right foot. This shot was determined to have entered the bottom of his foot and traveled through his foot and boot and then struck him in the right upper chest area. That bullet was stopped by his ballistic vest and was recovered at the scene of the shooting. The trajectory of that bullet indicated the shot had been fired at Brian as he was lying on his back and had raised his leg in an attempt to block the shot from being fired directly into his body. Brian also had injuries to his facial area that appeared to be from blunt force trauma. Brian did everything right with this incident. It was a priority 4 larceny call. He responded to take a report and to help the reporter of the larceny. He had no idea that Richard was there waiting for him. Had no idea he would get shot in the back and then have to fight for his gun with the shooter and later fight for his life. His actions fighting back with Richard, in doing so, it certainly saved the lives of the next responding deputies, like Deputy Smith, like Deputy Green, who Richard would certainly have shot and killed if he had the opportunity.
Other than the piece where Sarah called the dispatch trying to get information, our dispatch center on that day was phenomenal, truly phenomenal. I mean, just couldn't have asked for a more professional group of responders, and dispatchers that took care of the responders. It was just, they were really phenomenal. So, we did a really large critical debrief after the fact, and some of the dispatchers that were involved in that were there, and I never really, up until that point, really paid attention or thought much about secondary trauma until we heard them speak at that debrief. It was eye-opening for me to realize what they're going through, that they're there. They're the ones that are doing all of the communication and keeping track and taking phone calls and all of this, and then often, and not in this case, but often, then they just don't know what happens, because now they're not on the call. The officers are on scene, the calling party hangs up, and they never know what happens on these calls, and they go to the next one.
As if this incident wasn't stressful enough, the Sedgwick County dispatchers then took a very stressful threats call right after this incident.
Sedgwick County 911, what's the city of emergencies in?
Wichita Kansas. I want to report a homicide on the WPD. You punk ass stalker killed my brother. I swear you will.
What happened?
I said you punk ass stalker killed my brother. I swear there's going to be another one of you bitches to die. I promise you that. I promise you that. So won't you come find me right now? Come find me. And I'll put a hollow tip in one of you faggots.
Cedric County 911, what city is your emergency in?
Wichita, Kansas.
Location? The location?
I'm on hydraulics in MacArthur. You better send as many police as you can. As soon as they start pulling up, I swear on my brother that you just killed, I'm shooting. I got a 223 and I got a 45 with a 32 extended clip. Won't y'all come talk to me? Come talk to me right now.
About what, sir? What's going on?
Y'all just killed my motherfucking brother. You punk ass crackers. I hate all of y'all. I'm finna be at the quick shop, so send as many as you can. Come send them to me. And I promise, as soon as they start pulling up, I promise I'm start shooting. I promise you that.
Sir, there's no call for that. What is your name?
I'm glad one of y'all died. I'm glad. I'm happy that pussy died. It should have been his wife and his fucking kids. Yeah. Come holler at me. I promise you.
Sir, what is your name?
Come talk to me.
What's your name?
What's your name, bitch? What's your name? What's your name?
Dispatcher 265.
Well, yeah, send them to me. Come send them to me. Come send them to me. Come send them to me. I'm at Quick Shop on MacArthur and Hydraulic right now.
Okay.
By the trash can. Send them to me, and I promise I'm shooting. I promise you. And if you think I'm playing, try me. Send them to me. Send them to me.
Are you going to be near a vehicle?
Don't worry. Hey, just when you hear them gunshots ringing, you're going to know who it is. Send them to me.
Are you going to be alone?
I'm going to be alone with 172 bullets with me, ready to get let loose. Bring them to me. I promise you. I give you my right hand to Jesus Christ. Whoever pulls up first in the police car, I'm shooting.
What type of vehicle are you going to be near?
I'm going to find you, you stupid bitch. I promise. I'm going to find you.
That's an individual that knew the suspect in this case. I remember correctly, he maybe had at one time dated one of the suspect's sisters or something along those lines. And he started making phone calls to 911 and trying to lure officers in to confront him, and he was ready for us, and he's telling us what he had for a weapon, and ultimately he was taken into custody, and eventually he was charged federally because he was a felon. And one of the ATF agents that adopted that piece of the case was a former Sedgwick County Sheriff's deputy who took those threats to law enforcement here personally especially when it involved the loss of life of one of his former agency's deputies. So that individual ended up doing some federal time for those threats he'd made and being in violation of his probation status. But ultimately he didn't harm anybody else. There was no matter of fact, I don't think he was even where he said he was when he was trying to lure us in. We found him a day or two later at a residence, and he was arrested without any further incident.
An estimated 2,000 mourners, including law enforcement from several states, packed St. Peter Catholic Church in Schulte for Brian's funeral.
In the waters of baptism, Brian died with Christ and rose with him to new life. May he now share with him eternal glory.
A lot of it is kind of a blur to me, and I only remember parts of it. And I remember her standing out there at the cemetery, and just, they have us all line up and, have us salute. And I just remember crying. I was standing there, and I didn't like crying when I was in uniform, because at the time, to me, crying is weakness, and I don't like that. And so I remember standing there crying, and that was just, it was tough.
Outside, hundreds of members of the Patriot Guard posted at the church holding the United States flag in honor of Brian. Many students from the St. Peter Catholic School also stood outside in front of the Patriot Guards, also with flags, also to honor Brian.
I do recall many things from the funeral. Just the sheer amount of people that were there was huge. And I just remember, driving into the cemetery where he was buried after the funeral. And even on our way there, along the route, several people were standing outside of their cars with American flags and their hands on their hearts, on their chest. And that was just it was very, very humbling, very surreal, but very beautiful at the same time. They had hung a giant flag from ladder trucks, the fire trucks, for us to drive under. And I just remember it was just like law enforcement as far as I could see everywhere I looked. I do remember one of the cool things that stands out as well is they had all of their working dogs lined up with their badges around their necks. And I remember just thinking oh, Brian would have loved that. He would have thought that looked so cool, because they were all just perfectly still and, perfectly spaced out and beautiful dogs. So, yeah, it was really a neat, they did a wonderful job.
Hundreds of officers stood at attention at Rest Haven Cemetery on Friday for Brian's last call.
Attention all units, stand by for the final call honoring Deputy Brian Etheridge. Attention all units, this will be the last call for Sedgwick County Sheriff's Deputy Brian S. Etheridge, who bravely served our community from July 2008 until his final call, September the 28th, 2009. Please observe a moment of silence for one of our own. Rest in peace, Brian. Dispatch concluding, 12:52.
Deputy Brian Etheridge was the 7th deputy to die in the line of duty at the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office. He was the 298th officer to die in the line of duty in Kansas back in 2009, and was one of 146 officers who died in the line of duty across the United States that year. After Brian's death, it was only a few months before Sarah went back to Mark at the sheriff's office asking what could she do to help? What could she do to make a difference? What could she do to help keep Brian's memory alive?
This would have been in 2010, before our class was getting ready to graduate, that I approached Mark and I said, is there anything I can do? Is there anything I can do to help? And I did. I remember I helped buy them some extra plates to go in their vests, the sheriff's deputy class from that year. And, just some things that I felt like I could do to give back. And I wanted to do something that made a difference, and I wanted to do something that would stick with people. And there were things that I really felt passionate about and that I felt like could help people in the future. You know, like basically, I mean, it's simple, easy information, but just that reminder of like double check your information, double check your forms, and that everything's on file as it should be and spelled correctly, and have those tough conversations. You should talk. In this job, unfortunately, you really need to have those end-of-life discussions. You need to know what your wishes are for funeral planning, for, burial planning. But thankfully, Brian's family and I never had any issues of the sort, but I had become friends with people all over the United States and had seen families just so, it was just awful that they were ripped apart over something as simple as like, well, whether he was going to, their officer was going to be cremated or buried. And I thought, if there's anything I can do to just like let's help these people prepare for the worst so that it hopefully never happens. And so I approached Mark, and at the time that when Brian graduated, they were watching some really old videos on VHS. Again, that shows you how long ago this was. And I thought, there's got to be something a little bit better. So we just gave it a shot, and we thought, okay, well, I'm just going to go talk about my experiences and, what I went through before, during, and after, and things that helped, things that didn't help. And it seemed to have really taken off right from the start, and people appreciated it. And, for a while, I've even still to this day, I've done it so many times, but I thought, like, do they really want to see my face? Do they really want to hear my story? This is, having to sit down in front of them and tell them like the worst case scenario. But that's not my intention. That's my intention is to just help keep his story alive and keep him more than just a picture on the wall of the academy, and also just to give those little bits of advice that could have made things go a lot differently. Maybe I would have been able to see him, those types of things.
Sarah just came to me one day and she's like, I need to do something. And by this time now, I'd been promoted from sergeant to lieutenant. I'd done 11 months on patrol as a supervisor, and now I was back at our training academy as our training commander. So Sarah came and was like, I just can't let this be for nothing. I've got to do something. What can I do? How can I help? So we just started brainstorming, and I said, let's just do it. Let's go tell what happened to the next recruit class and their families. And we just kind of went on a limb and just tried it. And like I said, all of the deputies, they're like, that was really powerful and a really hard message to listen to, but please make sure the next class gets that same message. And Sarah talks about the thing with dispatch, and she talks about the wait to get to the hospital and, all of those things. She talks about how she was ushered out of the hospital through a back hallway for some odd, strange reason, and later learned it's because the suspect had just been brought in with his family. She later learned that she knew the suspect. They'd gone to grade school together.
A couple days later, I was in the car with Brian's mom, and she turned around kind of just out of nowhere, and she's like, I've been meaning to ask you. She's like, she's like, did you know him? Like, do you remember him? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, RJ. And when she said RJ, then it clicked. Because I didn't recognize his face. I mean, the last time I had seen him was middle school. So, but more than a decade ago. I know for a fact that he didn't recognize Brian. Brian didn't recognize him. Brian would have said something. I mean, that wasn't an issue at all. But he did go to middle school with us, and I rode the bus with him because he was bussed in from Wichita. And I remember him being quiet, and I remember him being in a lot of trouble, and he didn't graduate with us. He ended up going to the alternative school. I'm not sure if he even actually graduated from there, but just even having I do have his, I have his signature in my middle school yearbook.
Brian was a son, a husband, a father, and a friend to many. Brian was a young 26-year-old officer, just a few months into his career on the road. He'd been married for 3 short years, and he and his wife had a beautiful 2-year-old daughter, Natalie, that he just adored. a daughter who would never have memories of her father.
He was absolutely a wonderful family man. I think that he was probably a little bit more excited than I was even when I found out that we were going to have a baby. But we knew we wanted children. I thought we'd wait a little bit longer, but he was so excited when he found out he was going to be a dad. And even from the moment that he found out that she was a girl, he was just head over heels before she even got here. And he was very much a man's man. He loved hunting, fishing, being outdoors, all of those types of hobbies. But, he would just take her right along with him. He never took her hunting with him, but he would come back with his geese and he would lay them all out in the garage. And I thought it was absolutely disgusting. And, she'd just get right out there with him and help him clean birds. And, so he really found ways to just, even though she was so little, just incorporate, her into anything that he could.
The thing that I remember most about him was his smile. I was like, he's always smiling, and it was just one of them things. Like, I couldn't tell you, I never went on a call with him. I never supervised him. I was a detective, so other than seeing him when they came through for their training for detectives, when they come in and do their little observations, that's probably the most time I ever spent with him, but I just remembered his smile.
Brian quickly earned the reputation because when Brian did say something, it was often a very quick-witted, short statement that just stopped everything in tracks, and it was, this guy was funny. His classmates nicknamed him the Silent Assassin because it'd just be quiet, there'd be nothing, and all of a sudden, boom, he'd come up with one of these one-liners, and that nickname had carried him from the academy until when he went on a patrol or as a deputy. So that's who Brian was.
Always a good guy from the very beginning. He was, if you had questions, he would ask them. If you needed help with something, he was there to help you. So, just an all-around, good guy. He liked to joke and play around as well. We referred to him as the Silent Assassin. We would sit in there and we'd laugh and joke in the squad room Brian didn't jump in there all the time, but usually when he did, it was a zinger. It was, it just come out of left field, and it was like you didn't have a response to it. You just kind of laughed it off and went on about your day.
The Sedgwick County Law Enforcement Memorial is located at the northeast corner of the Wichita City Hall at Central and Main Streets in downtown Wichita, Kansas. It was dedicated in August of 2011 and is one of the most unique law enforcement memorials in the country. The memorial not only displays the names and badges of their fallen heroes, like Brian, but it also displays their boots. In many cases, the actual bronzed duty boots worn by the officers who were lost in the line of duty. Brian's boots, with the bullet hole, are displayed there at the memorial under his name and badge. A chilling reminder of the risks that the men and women of law enforcement take every day they walk out their doors and leave their families to serve our communities. They are our true heroes. Please take a few minutes to visit our website at www.officerdownmemorialpodcast.com. There you can see pictures from this amazing memorial, along with pictures of Brian, pictures of the crime scene, and some incredibly moving pictures from the funeral and from the cemetery. Deputy Brian Etheridge is recognized each year in May at the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, the Kansas Law Enforcement Memorial, and during Police Week at the National Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C.
Walking eastbound.
Thank you for spending the time to listen, learn about, and honor the memory of this fallen hero. Make sure you take the time to thank your local law enforcement for their service and their sacrifice. And don't forget to thank their families too. They also sacrifice so much for our safety. It's up to us to help ensure the sacrifices made by these fallen heroes and by their families are never forgotten. So please share this podcast with family and friends. Until next time, this is the Officer Down Memorial Podcast. I'm Scott Rose. Thanks for listening.